Hey everybody, this is Rustin Rose with Metalholic Magazine and Access Entertainment. With us today, Jamie van Dyck of Earthside. How you doing, brother?
Doing all right. Just woke up and ready to roll.
Congratulations to start. You self-released your debut album and immediately ended up on dozens of year-end best-of lists. That has to be pretty fulfilling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the album had like a 3-year, 4-year incubation period from writing it through recording it, and so there was a long time of it kind of being this idea in our minds, and then this thing that we had recorded but no one else could hear. So for it to finally get this kind of response, to see our baby be welcomed to the world, yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Well, and I want to talk about the album a little bit more in depth, but first, you guys toured with Soilwork, Soulfly, and Shattered Sun. That had to be an interesting tour, especially given that you guys have always been more of a studio band.
Before that, we hadn't had a chance to tour. So, I mean, ultimately, I think we view it as, we'll see if we're more of a studio band or a live band, but we'd played shows locally and regionally, and obviously there are certain things that we do that are easier to do in the studio, like having an orchestra or guest vocalists. I would say that, it was interesting and actually really, really fun to be kind of the oddball on the tour. Because for one, most people who were going to see that show hadn't heard of us, and we're also just a very different band genre-wise from those three bands. Their frontmen kind of dropping F-bombs left and right to get everybody, pumped, and we're just like, hey, what's up, everybody? So, but I think it was really cool to sort of watch the audience kind of at first be like, what is this? This isn't like the metal we came to see, and then over the course of the first 5 minutes of our opening song, just sort of seeing their facial expressions change from like confusion to being kind of sort of entranced and in the moment, and in a really cool way. And a lot of people came up to us afterwards and were really positive about how interesting of a fit we were on that bill, and how cool it was to have a band that was aiming more to be beautiful and kind of haunting, and I think a lot of people were like, I could totally smoke to this, stuff like that, which I think for an audience that isn't usually going for, seeking out progressive music is kind of their way of connecting with it.
I almost feel a little out of my element talking to you guys. You guys are such a well-educated and intelligent band, and I'm this lowly hard rock metal guy, but we'll try and keep up. But now, you and Frank and Ben have been playing together basically since high school, I believe. You added Ryan in 2012 and formed Earthside at that point. Tell us a bit about your conceptual image of the band's sound when you came together.
Yeah, well, as you alluded to, the three of us played together, and, with Earthside, I think our previous band had kind of felt like our high school, college project in a way that it was a learning experience. It was a vehicle for us to experiment and learn about ourselves through music and how we wanted to write and play together. And then the first song on our album, called The Closest I've Come, was actually something we wrote right before Ryan joined the band with our old bass player. And I think there was just a communal moment of, holy cow, this is our sound. We've got it. Not that everything's going to sound like that, but we wanted everything to be of that ethos, of that level of dripping with emotion and creativity, and we wanted to hold ourselves to that standard. And we felt like this was a fresh start, and we wanted to hold everything we wrote from then on to that standard. So, yeah, we changed our name. It took a year to figure out what our new name was going to be, and to get Ryan in the band and writing more stuff that was along that level, along those lines. And but I think it was, wanting to have this very high ambition, high emotion, very honest, I like to say, aim for the rafters sort of mission statement with this music, and that was, I think, Earthside, what its goal was from its inception.
Well, and that leads into my next question, because A Dream in Static was perhaps last year's most impressive debut, especially in progressive hard rock metal. I know you call it cinematic rock. Tell us about A Dream in Static from your perspective.
Well, I think overall we did reach our goals. I think one thing I'll say is, and I think it's what drives creative people, is you'll never quite feel like you've arrived or you've accomplished everything you set out to, and that's what is going to make us more driven still on our next record and on the one after that. And it's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be something that you're continually aspiring to. But that said, I think we're really proud of it. And, as far as the record itself, the Dream and Static, both the album and the song, I think, have a meaning that embodies how we felt while we were writing it, which is this idea of we have this, I keep saying it, this lofty aspiration, this vision for what we want our lives to be and for the music we could be making and for a place in the world and for a purpose for our lives. It just be feeling like we're static, like we can't move towards it. No matter how much activation energy we put into it, we're not getting there. And I think that came from a lot of the frustration of our previous band, and then also just the fact that this record took, as an unsigned band with a very difficult way of approaching this record that made it take a lot longer than most records would. There were a lot of times where I think it felt like it wasn't going to happen, and that we had to sort of muster several ounces of courage to keep going and push through and believe that it was. And even early on, that was really palpable, and I think that affected the writing. And I think a lot of the angst, so to speak, in the music comes from that, of feeling that personal identity crisis, or that feeling of what are we going to amount to? We're fresh out of college, and now what? Our whole life up till now has been preparing for something, but now it matters, now it counts. And I think that's, for 20-somethings, especially nowadays, I think that's a common source of anxiety.
Right. Well, and you alluded to this a moment ago. It's like once the album was complete, Frank already voiced that he felt it could have been better. And I was just wondering, is that just his perfectionist nature, or are you the same way? You immediately start thinking about what you could have improved upon?
A little bit. I mean, I think Frank and I are different in that way to a degree. I think I listened back to the record, and I can think of things that we could do better next time, and ways that could be improved. At the same time, I think I'm a bit more of an optimist than Frank as far as the cast of characters within the band. Frank has the reputation of being the most critical in general and the most self-critical. So, I think the way I try to view it is, compartmentalize it, have it contained in a way where it's driving me to do better, but also not haunting me and not sort of preventing me from appreciating what we have done. And,
right.
So I think the way I view our record is overall fairly healthy.
Well, and you sort of alluded that too. You guys have known each other for ages. You throw yourself into intense recording several days a week for hours on end. This took several years to put together. How did you manage not to kill each other?
Well, there was one guy. There was. I mean, the four of us even live together right now. So I think part of it is the marriage has been well tested before. So
right.
Even though we fight like brothers and at times probably need marriage counseling as a band, because we go back so far and have known each other so long, it's kind of just what we know. It's like living with your brothers or living with your family growing up. It's that same idea. You wake up and that's who you live with. So even if you fight with your mom and dad or your siblings, they're your family. So I think it's what we know and what we've shaped each other in a lot of ways. So I think it's what we're accustomed to, and I think that served us really well on tour. I mean, people were like, "Aren't you guys going to be killing each other at each other's throats on tour?" It's like, that's what we've been doing for years. The only difference is now we're playing shows. The actual living together part is no different. So I think we're well prepared for that aspect of being on tour, for having lived together and been in close quarters for so many hours and so many days for the last who knows how many years.
Well, let's talk about making the record, because most bands, especially if they're putting it out themselves, they're going to record locally using Pro Tools or whatnot. You guys recorded in a lot of places, a lot of stuff in Sweden, I believe, and you worked with David Costello and Jens Bogren, both, I believe, on your debut. How'd that come about, and why record in so many places?
Yeah, well, from a budgetary standpoint, I think one thing we'll learn next record is to try to reduce the number of places. But at the same time, I think it was really good from a life experiences standpoint, kind of like, a lot of a lot of people will travel after school or travel after college, so we got to see a lot of the world in doing it. But as far as why, I think at each juncture it was, what is best for the songs, what is best for the music, and our belief was that the local scene, at least in Connecticut, but I think this is true in a lot of places, it's very, you hit a ceiling, and then it's very hard to have it push you above that. You need, either a really great record or, a label to come sign you, or something about you that stands out from a publicity standpoint to become a national act or an international act. And, and looking at other bands that have had success recently, it seems like it happened in some ways out of nowhere or through a different kind of organic grassroots where they had made their music just really, really strong and undeniable, and everything about their product undeniable. And, the internet was more their vehicle than touring locally and regionally and then having it grow outward the old grassroots way. And so, we strategically looked at it and said, if we just keep playing shows in Connecticut, we're not going to achieve our dreams. And at the same time, we're also not going to put out the record that we think we're capable of and that we're really proud of. And so it really came to, no matter what happens, one, we want to put out an album that, regardless of how it fares commercially, we can, at the end of our lives when we're 70s, 80s, we can feel like we held nothing back. We did exactly what we wanted to and had always dreamt of doing. And then two, to have an album that can hit the market and can have us taken seriously as a national act right away and bypass that whole kind of local build-up. Right. And trying to become the king of your local scene, which, at least in our local scene, has not really produced a national touring act in who knows how long. So I think we were right to do that. And so, I think we felt that working with these producers was the best way to create an album of that ilk, of that level, of that undeniability. And we also felt like we could learn a lot from them. I mean, especially Frank within the band is a producer himself.
Right.
And while Frank has a very natural gift for it and a very good ear for it, there's an experience level that he's never worked on a record, of an industry signed metal or hard rock act, and these producers have. So I felt like us working with them was also a chance for us to, in some ways, kind of intern under them too. We're not only are we recording our album, we're watching to see what they do. What microphones do they use when they're mixing our record? How do they EQ the drums, or what effects are they using, and what just the whole process of everything. That when we go to do it in the future, potentially ourselves, we're going to be so much more seasoned and knowledgeable about how to achieve the sound we want if we have to do it ourselves in the future. And with flying to Moscow for the orchestra, that was just the studio orchestra that we found online that seemed interested and reasonably priced, and their producer, a guy named Yuri Sazonov, was really enthusiastic about what we were doing. He likes progressive music and rock music, which is, in the orchestral world, you get a lot of sort of elitist snobs. So when you get somebody who's like, oh, this is cool, this is awesome, you definitely want to run with it. Music on their page sounded really good. So,
and that live orchestra really added a truly compelling element to what you were doing too. It's one of the things that stood out for me. I'm sure you learned a lot from the experience of making this record, but were there one or two key things that really stood out to you among everything else that you took away that you'll sort of keep with you?
Well, I think it's different from what I'll take from an educational standpoint versus a nostalgia standpoint. Recording the orchestra, I felt like I learned the most from, just because even though, I scored Mob Mentality over a handful of years, other than one college orchestration class and an orchestration textbook for it, I didn't really have any experience with it. It's not like you could just wake up one day and be like, hey, live orchestra, can you play this and see what it sounds like? So, that was the first time an orchestra had ever played anything I'd written. And, the only thing I had to test it, how it sounded, how it was going to work, was a computer program that simulated an orchestra. And so, I learned on the fly very quickly what was going to sound like, how I imagined, and what certain instruments could do and produce in reality. And I think if we go to do this in the future, I learned so much more in those 2 days than I could have in a few years of reading and, sort of goofing around on my computer and building this arrangement, finding out, right on the fly, under the gun of a studio session, oh, well, yeah, violin technically can go that high, but if you have to, certain things like with what is idiomatic for certain instruments and what they can actually produce and how it will actually sound dynamically with real players, things like that. And yeah, it was really intense, and I was really, at some points I was scared that, like, oh God, this dream I had, isn't going to come true. And then we were able to make enough adjustments on the fly that luckily Mob Mentality came to fruition as not exactly as I planned, but in some ways, better, who knows. So as far as nostalgically, I think, and sticking with Mob Mentality, for me personally, working with Lajon was total dream come true. I mean, Seven Dust was probably my favorite band back to middle school and high school, and his voice always just had such an expressive quality to it for me that just always resonated with me. So to have his voice on the song I'd written, the song that was my personal baby on the album, that was so cool. And because of all the complex counts in the song, I was in there in the live room in the vocal booth. They're basically conducting him with the counts, and giving him like dynamics and cutoffs, and it was almost like he was my opera soloist, my tenor, and I'm the conductor there, giving him cues and motioning with my hands for him to give me more, or to cut off or to taper off, give me some beautiful vibrato, and basically for 2 days of studio sessions, I was working with one of my idols to shape the song that I've been working on for a few years. So, and because it was dedicated in part to a friend of mine who'd recently passed away, who had gone and seen a Seven Dust concert with me, and that was one of our bonding experiences. There were just so many things about it that were really personal and meaningful about that.
Right. Well, that partially answers the question you just segued into for me. I was going to have you tell me about the guest vocalists for the project and why you chose them specifically. Because, I wouldn't have expected Lajon Witherspoon. He wouldn't have occurred to me for this album, and he worked out so perfectly.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be the case even more so in the future, assuming we continue this guest vocalist model, which is something that'll still be up for debate until we actually do the second record. But I like it, so I hope we continue to do it. I think we want it to be something where we take vocalists out of their comfort zone, or not necessarily make them uncomfortable, but to take them out of a context that their fans are used to hearing them in. So that way it's something, when they hear it with Earthside, it's something different. And then that in combination with who is the best singer for this song. And I think, all our decisions are primarily informed by serving the song. And, the songs were written first, and then each song had an A-list of vocalists we thought could knock that vocal part out of the park and really give that song the life and the emotion that we wanted to have. So each song had that list, so to speak. And we contacted a few people for each song, and somehow, by the grace of the gods and the heavens and fates, we were able to get an A-list vocalist for each of the 4 songs. So, but I think it was interesting having Lajon on our in some ways, most progressive song, and have, Bjorn, who sings in a heavy band, which is, more, probably 80 to 90% harsh, screamed vocals, and having him almost entirely clean vocals on our song. And
right.
Then, Eric Zerlinger, who's in like an alt-rock band akin to like 30 Seconds to Mars, he's now singing maybe the darkest and heaviest song on our album with the most aggressive vocals. So we liked having it kind of be the curveball of, the metal vocalist is singing mostly clean, and the pop vocalist is singing like, metal, and on like almost like a doom song. So, and I think on future records we may try to go further outside the genre. I think we would like to have somebody on our record who's not even in the rock world as a vocalist, and as well as instrumentalist. I think further expanding the genre surprises, hopefully in the future, somebody like Lajon is like a, not even close to a surprise compared to how out there we go with it. But yeah, in each case, it really was the song. We served the song, and while Lajon, it isn't really what he does in Seven Dust, I think there are qualities of his voice that were exactly what we wanted for that song.
Right, it worked really well. And now that you've had such success with this album, especially within the community, you'll be able to reach out to more people for those possibilities in the future. I think that door's now been opened. Before we get out of here, just to get to know you a little bit better, tell us a bit about your path to music, who and what inspires you musically and as a guitarist. I know you attended Yale for musical composition, but tell us about that path that sort of led you there.
Okay. Well, and my bandmates are a huge part of it, especially Frank and Ben. I've known Frank since I was 7, he was 6, so we really raised each other musically in a lot of ways. And then Ben came into the fold when we were teenagers, early high school. So, I think first and foremost, your peers do so much to inform and define who you are. And, you grow together, you reinforce each other's positives, you hopefully can limit each other's negatives in a constructive way. And I think there's so much a way of, that's why this band is unique in that way, and that basically it's our youth peers who grew up together and now, working together as adults making the music we want. But the interesting thing I would say is that I really didn't start out with rock music at all. My parents raised me on Beethoven symphonies and Mozart and Tchaikovsky. That was the bulk of what I was listening to when I was 4, 5, and 6, in addition to like Peter, Paul, and Mary and Barney songs. But as far as like the serious music I was listening to, it was really mostly orchestral, classical composers, and romantic composers occasionally too. And then about, I guess maybe I was like 9 or 10, my parents started getting me into Fleetwood Mac, and then there was like the pop and rock music of that day, like when I was growing up, like the Backstreet Boys and Sugar Ray and things like that. And I kind of latched on to that a little bit, and then it very quickly was a gateway to me finding music I liked a lot more. And actually in middle school, when I was writing songs on the guitar, and another Seven Dust connection, one of their guitar players, Clinton Lowry, very quickly became one of my favorite guitarists in the genre of rock and metal. And even though Seven Dust isn't necessarily a progressive band per se, I think there's a lot about the way that Clint and John approach chord voicings that's more interesting than a typical rock band. And there's a lot of things within their music, rhythmically and harmonically, that's really interesting. And that led me to bands more like Porcupine Tree and Opeth that take that to the next level. And as a guitar player, I think because of my background, I was always more interested in things that were, rather than like just shredding or chop heavy, I was more interested in chord voicings and creating sort of blocks of sound vertically, meaning like, harmony and all that,
right,
with guitar. And I always approach music that way more. So I think part of it is by nature of what my talents were and what my gifts are. I have perfect pitch, so I have a very good ear, and I'm very naturally inclined to that. And I have short, fat, stubby fingers, so I'm never going to be the world's greatest guitar player. So by virtue of also, the combination of what I was attracted to and raised on, as well as what I had a predisposition to have the opportunity to be really good at, and how life rewards you for that. I think those were guitarists who, for the most part, their writing style is more about the right notes or interesting chords or creating something beautiful more so than, dude, I just shredded 600 notes per minute, So, I couldn't. That was more what I was attracted to, and I think it was a big part of me developing and finding my own sound, both as a guitarist and a songwriter before college.
Excellent. So to put that in visual perspective for our readers, give us maybe 3 records that were sort of like the mileposts that informed your path musically, those points where things changed direction for you.
Let's see if I can come up with these. Well, okay, one big one was when I was in 8th grade. I think that when I melded my classical background and my recently discovered rock interest, I would say S&M by Metallica, the Symphony of Metallica album.
Right.
I think ever since then I wanted to do that, and then Mob Mentality, slightly more progressive probably than the songs on S&M, but not necessarily. I think some of the orchestral arrangements there are pretty elaborate and not necessarily just relegated to backup, like background music. Michael Kamen's arrangements are pretty out front, and especially on the instrumental piece, the Call of Cthulhu that opens it up, as far as Metallica's involvement. So on that and the reimagination of Master of Puppets, there's a lot musically happening, and that definitely turned me on to more progressive music and heavier rock and orchestra in this other context. And I think for most people, they come at it with they like Metallica first, and then they either like or don't like the orchestra. For me, it was I had the symphonic background, and that was my gateway into metal. So
right.
That was a really important record. Right after that, I would say the Seven Dust record, Animosity, that came out, was the first hard rock record of that day, that first metal record of that day that got me really into that as well. And then Porcupine Tree and Absentia was the first technically progressive music record that I was really hooked on. So I would say that those were really seminal records in my development.
Right. I think Frank said that the Porcupine Tree one's an essential record that should be in everybody's collection. So, all right.
Yeah.
A couple more questions just for fun before we get out of here. Earthside is such a serious band, and your music is certainly for thinking listeners. Is there a lighter side to you?
As people, absolutely. And I think having that as an outlet actually helps us. There are people who've met us who, if they met us in a different context, if it wasn't at a show or through recording this album, that, meet us on the weekend, it doesn't come up that we were in a band immediately, or if it does, they have no idea what we sound like. And they're shocked when they hear our music. I mean, because of the intensity. And I think in a lot of ways, a lot of our angst and the intensity in us being philosophical about and self-analytical about life in general and our purpose and all that, our legacy, that we have a really, I think, healthy and productive outlet for it that a lot of people don't, and so we're blessed in that way. But because of that, it's sort of filtered out all through that in our everyday life, if somebody just meets us, at a party or, at a gathering of friends, we're very goofy, and definitely, especially when we're together, because we have so many inside jokes we've
right.
had for knowing each other for so long, and we can finish each other's sentences off. But there's I think not only is there a lighter side, I think it catches people off guard that there is such a not light side if they meet us in the other, in outside of music first. And we also have goofy music outlets too. I mean, sometimes to take some of the weight off of how much pressure there is that we put on ourselves to make this music as intense and epic and beautiful as possible. I think that can be a crushing pressure at times to perform under. And so when we're in a creative dry spell or we're needing just something to relax, I mean, Frank and I used to be in a band in college called Scotty and the Pornos. Our genre of music was porno. And, I have a joking, basically like Nickelback meets Five Finger Death Punch, like impersonator side project, and that I'm not actually doing anything with, but I've written probably 20 to 25 songs as. And, Frank and Ben do this thing where they write songs that impersonate like these like atonal tech metal bands, and then have another side project where they impersonate local bands that are like taking pride in how local they are. And these are just like total jokes that are never going to see the light of day ever. But I think if you're really wrapped up in this music, sometimes you need little goofy things like this that you don't put that much time into, but every now and then revisit just to kind of lighten it up a little. And it definitely refuels the creative juices to go hard at this.
All right, so A Dream in Static is very much about, at least from my understanding of it, sort of that search for meaning in life, or the meaning of life, if you will. So having spent the last several years putting all this together and building towards this and it finally coming to fruition, are you any closer for yourself to discovering what the meaning of life is?
I think in and out, maybe in the sense that there are moments where you feel, certainly sometimes in the last couple of months, there's been a real feeling of fulfillment and accomplishment, and and then it can be fleeting and it can leave you. And I don't think it's something that we as human beings really ever fully understand or can really latch on to. Like, we found it, we've got it. But I think the process has taught us a lot about ourselves, and having this period of exploration together. Yeah, I think there's no doubt that we've grown as human beings from having been on this journey together. But I think our journey will continue, and our search still will continue. And our second record, I don't think will be a total departure thematically. I mean, who knows what it'll be? We started writing it a little, but yeah, I think a lot of that is still yet to be seen.
So the last question, just for mindless fun, is there a television series you'll admit to binge watching?
Oh, there are a lot. I don't really watch TV, so really my only way of watching any TV series is the modern day method now of Netflix. I mean, you talking recently? Like, what is the last one I binge watched, or just any that I have
favorite in
watched?
Recent memory?
Okay, I mean, both Breaking Bad and Dexter, I was really late to the party on, and so everybody had. With Breaking Bad, I didn't even watch a single episode until after the show had concluded, and everybody continued to talk about it. I don't feel guilty admitting to binge watching that, as it's pretty highly regarded. But I think the more guilty thing to admit is that, until 2014, I hadn't watched a single episode of Breaking Bad. I think that's a harder thing to admit. But I got caught up very quickly. I got very addicted. And then sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep, if I'm struggling to do that, I know you're not supposed to watch TV before you fall asleep, I don't think, medically, but it's not the best thing for you. But if you're having trouble, sometimes I'll go through a bunch of Frasier episodes and get nostalgic there. That's what my parents watched when I was a kid a lot. That was their favorite show then. I'd say those are the three I'll admit to right now.
Gotcha. Awesome, Jamie. Thank you so much for taking some time to chat with us. Of course, I love the new album. It's fantastic, and we can't wait to see more touring and can't wait to hear what the second album's going to sound like now that you've really gotten yourself together on the first one here. So,
well, we can't wait to find out what it's going to sound like either. We're as curious and eagerly anticipating it as you guys are, and thank you so much for the support of our record, Rustin.
Absolutely. Take care.